Hello, everyone. Dr. Stillman here with Clark Engelbert for another webinar on the wonders, the wilds of hair tissue mineral analysis. We are really excited to be talking about, obviously, hair tissue mineral analysis and minerals in general. This is part of our promotion for our HTMA training course. Level 1 is enrolling now. We have 15 slots left. We're going to talk more about that at the end. We're going to give you guys the meat and potatoes up front. This is also totally unscripted. Clark and I didn't really do a lot of planning today, but we know exactly what we need to talk about, and so we're going to talk about it.
Yes.
Clark, any opening thoughts?
No, not really. I think just getting into the topic of what is mineral balancing is going to be very, very interesting. I've seen a lot in recent memory, people trying to explain this system, this healing system, and trying to put HTMA in its proper context is it's critical to understand HTMA in its proper context, which is through this lens of mineral balancing.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same way that a lot of people don't understand minerals very well in their proper context, i.e. minerals exist in a system inside of you and interact, they similarly don't understand HTMA in its proper context and the way in which we use it and the way in which we teach about how to use it in HTMA Secrets, our course.
Sean says hello. Sean, good morning to you. I think Sean's over in your neck of the woods, Clark. He lives up in Idaho.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
He is also very cold then, I would imagine.
I know, right? So, quick little intro. Olivia. Hey, Clark. Already through most of the webinars. Good stuff. Taking notes.
Nice.
Or Oliver, excuse me.
Yes, Oliver is awesome.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Oliver. So yeah, Oliver, if you're in level 1, we're looking forward to coaching you. Those of you who want more info on the coaching, stay tuned. That'll be at the end. All right. So real quick introduction. So secrets of hair tissue mineral analysis. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, we're going to talk about why minerals are vital to all health and disease, what most practitioners get wildly wrong about minerals, what hair tissue mineral analysis is and is not, why we can't just add more minerals and get better outcomes, why you need practitioners in your life who can help you understand this material. I'm Leland Stillman, medical doctor, general practitioner. I specialize in functional and integrative medicine. I've been featured by Ben Greenfield, Mind Body Green, Dr. Joe Mercola, Wellness Mama, and many more. I now run a 99% virtual practice from Florida and teach the HTMA course with Clark, who is?
I am the owner and CEO of Nutritional Analytics, featured in a documentary coming up by Dr. Wendy Myers called Heavy. Went to school for nutritional sciences and biochemistry at the University of Arizona and Boise State University. And then I was trained by Dr. Lawrence Wilson in hair tissue mineral analysis, interpretation, and worked with him for about 4 years.
So yeah.
You
can find me on, yes, Leanna asks if this will be available for replay. Yes, it will be, Leanna. I do want to let you all know, though, that the offer to enter the coaching program is time sensitive, so don't put this off until next weekend because it will not be available. All right, you can find me at stillmanmd.substack.com, at stillmanmd on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And Clark, you can find.
Yep, right there, nutritional analytics _analytics on Instagram. That's the main platform that I've been using to get the message out. Using Facebook a little bit, probably going to be signing up for a Substack soon so that I can do some longer form writing.
And then Facebook, Clark Jeffrey. And as a side note, we are going to be building a network of people who've taken our course, who are promoting this on their social media so that we can raise and elevate the what do we call it? Narrative, the discussion around these topics on social media, and to really help more people understand the material so they can get better outcomes, because that's what Clark and I are really all about.
Right.
All right. So I want to lead into our conversation, because this is going to be a very free-flowing conversation between Clark and I, with a great quote from Linus Pauling, who said, "You can trace every sickness, every disease, and every ailment to a mineral deficiency." And on that note, the title of today's talk is Unleash the Power of Minerals, Why Minerals Are the Key to Health and Disease. And the reason why Clark and I spend so much time talking about minerals is that we both, in our independent experience, arrived at the inescapable conclusion that minerals were the thing that really made the biggest difference in people's health and well-being. And so we basically I spend much of my time now in my medical practice interpreting these, sending people protocols and balancing minerals. We spend obviously plenty of time in these courses where we're teaching people how to understand this information and understand the testing. And we do this because pound for pound of all the testing, of all the treatment, of all the stuff that I find valuable in taking care of patients, this is the thing that is the most efficient, the most effective, the most convenient, and pound for pound the most valuable. Like if I were coming into this as a patient, and I were to ask myself, hey, I've got this budget and I've got this much time and I've got this much bandwidth for taking supplements and herbs and doing biohacks and whatever, what should I focus on? My answer would be a hair tissue mineral analysis balancing protocol, which is why, I could have launched lots of courses with lots of different people, but instead I ended up launching a course with Clark on this topic. So minerals are key to health and disease because, as my friend Jim Laird likes to say, small hinges swing big doors. And small hinges are minerals. They're very small. They're the smallest units of mass. They're the elements of the periodic table. And without them, you get sick and fall apart and die young. And the other thing that people need to realize is that it's not as simple as, and I said this earlier, you can't just dump more minerals into your system and get better and better outcomes. It just doesn't work that way. And one of the key principles that I think maybe the key thing that people are missing about minerals is that minerals interact with one another, both in a synergistic way, in an antagonistic way. In very real biological terms, when we look at the minerals that we examine on a hair tissue mineral analysis, calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, these 4 macro minerals all work together to do different things within the cell, within the system. And so when you have imbalances in one of them relative to the others, you can create illness. And likewise, if you fix imbalances between these, you'll see a lot of problems go away and overall fitness, health, and well-being of the organism increase or improve. So, Clark.
Yes. I think an interesting point that you're making there as well, along with the interactions piece, is this very minute quantities of minerals actually have very profound effects in the body,
Yes.
right? We're talking about microgram level dosing for some of these minerals. And this is actually based on a principle called the biological amplification of trace element action. And it's a word salad. Pull out your textbooks. But this is actually based on a real phenomenon. And, it basically is just highlighting this effect that very, very small amounts of minerals have a profound effect. A minute quantity of chromium can really determine like how well your glucose regulating system works, and how well insulin works. But sort of beyond that, there's also another really interesting fact about minerals. Minute quantities of them have profound effects. They interact with each other, but they're also pleiotropic. They're used for a lot of different functions all at the same time. And this goes to another very important reason why we tend to focus on them, right? And why, it explains why when people come to us and they have a lot of different conditions, right, or a lot of different symptoms, which is what we always see, we never see someone that just comes for, I only have this one thing. I only have leaky gut. That person almost always has 5 or 10 different things going on at the same time. And it has to do with how these minerals are used all across the body in every conceivable system that you have inside of you. And so when things go wrong, or you have a deficiency or a relative deficiency, when they're imbalanced against each other, imbalances in the mineral ratios, then you tend to see a lot of different things go wrong at the same time. But the corollary to this is that you can correct a lot of different things all at the same time if you use this process, this mineral balancing process correctly, where really HTMA kind of shines. Understanding this system, the mineral balancing system, and understanding HTMA in the context of this system is really the key to understanding it, but then also unlocking its power.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that the balance of these things is one of the most important things for us to focus on. Now, I will say on that note that the vast majority of people don't actually have enough of these minerals in their diet.
Mhm.
They're grossly deficient relative to optimal health. And that's important that we discuss this difference between adequate and optimal, right?
Right.
Because it's the body triages nutrients just like you triage your
Right.
resources in your life, right? If you make $50,000 a year and you have a brain, you don't go out and buy $100,000 BMW because you know you can't afford it, right? And
Mhm.
your brain is actually much smarter than you in relative terms. It doesn't really make mistakes. It uses the wiring that it's got from generations and generations of adaptation and exposure. I mean, it's remarkable. You
Mhm.
see epigenetic changes in people that are encoded due to experiences of their grandparents, great grandparents, great great grandparents. You know, if your grandparents, let's say, lived through a famine, their genes, the genes for gaining weight may have been turned on,
Mm.
and the genes for eating more food when it's abundant may have been turned on so that they would and their offspring would have more adipose tissue, more fat around, more muscle around, more bone around in the event of a scarcity situation, right?
Mhm.
You see that in the children of people who survived the Great Depression, other great or terrible disasters, or things like that. And so, while most people are grossly deficient, they don't realize they're deficient because the
Mm.
body is triaging the nutrients so that all their essential bodily functions are still functioning at some level, even if it's a very mediocre, low
Mm.
level, right? And that's the
Yep.
concept of triage. And we
Yep.
know this happens. Like if the body only has so much of a certain nutrient, it will actually shut down the pathways that are associated with that are not survival
Mhm.
associated to
Mhm.
conserve that nutrient. We know that from studies on vitamin K that
Right.
Bruce Ames and Joyce McCann did decades ago now. And minerals are no different. And what's really important about the minerals that people need to realize is that they're such a huge component of your total body mass. So if you
Mhm.
think about it,
Mhm.
your body is something like 70% water, and then a huge proportion of it beyond that is protein,
Mhm.
collagen, fat,
Mhm.
carbohydrate, right? But
Mhm.
beyond that, you've got gram quantities of calcium, magnesium,
Right.
potassium, sodium, and then milligram or gram quantities of trace elements like
Yep.
iron, selenium,
Oh.
chromium, copper, zinc, etc.
Mhm.
However, right, in with those trace elements and macro minerals, you've got, you can mute yourself when you need to cough.
Sorry about that.
It's okay, man. I only figured that out recently myself.
Mm.
But anyway, you've got small quantities of these minerals around in the body, and you can balance, you need to balance them. But many people are just grossly deficient and don't realize how much more of these things they need for
Mhm.
optimal. And that's where, when we start working with somebody, and part of why we're so passionate about this is the overall trend is for us to identify the things that they're not getting enough of,
Mm.
help them restore those foods into their diet, and then add supplements on top of that in order to really kickstart the process. And
Mhm.
as they get more mineral density in their diet, as they're digesting their food better, all of a sudden a lot of their problems start to improve. They
Mm.
feel better, they're more fit, they see the value, they see the benefit. And I mean, in my experience, most of the issues that my patients are struggling with, all of them, as Linus Pauling said, come back to minerals in some way or another. And
Mm.
virtually all of them, so long as they're at least somewhat compliant with what I recommend, see some kind of improvement, either subjective or objective, in their well-being and their overall health, and they get the results that they're looking for if we're consistent enough with this testing. But that's a whole other issue that we'll talk about a little bit more later, because it's not just about a one and done testing, modality. It's about a continuity, and it's about a whole way of approaching. Honestly, it's very much about a lifestyle and approaching life from a different perspective at the end of the day.
I think you definitely mentioned something that is extremely important to note. When minerals become imbalanced or deficient, there's different types of deficiencies that we can identify using this test because it's a tissue test, which is very interesting. There's overt deficiencies, deficiencies that lead to very easily identifiable clinical symptoms, and that, like, an obvious example of this would be like very low iodine leads to a goiter, right? Or very,
Right.
very low iron leads
And I
to,
would call these overt deficiencies.
yes,
And if
exactly.
your doctor misses these, they're not that bright.
then you really need to fire them. But then there's also these subclinical deficiencies that can occur where there is subtle dysfunction and silent dysfunction that occurs slowly over time. And that's really where hair analysis can shine, because it's a biopsy test, right? It's a cellular reading of the minerals. Most traditional allopathic testing modalities are going to test your blood, maybe your urine, maybe saliva. And
the problem with blood testing is, and I can't tell you how many blood versus hair analyses with blood minerals and then hair. And if you don't understand the dynamics between the blood and the hair, you'll get wildly and this is where, I think you and I are both frustrated with where a lot of the social media narrative around this is. The people who are talking about minerals and also hair don't truly understand the dynamics between the blood and the hair. So they don't understand, for example, things that are, and these are very important things, like they don't understand that it's very common for people with high total body iron to actually have a low level of iron in their hair.
Yep. And
when we find that, oftentimes those people do much better with blood donation. But then there's other factors in the hair tissue analysis that I will say, oh, well, we need to hold off on this for you, or we need to get some additional testing or whatever, because iron donation, or blood donation, I should say, iron depletion, isn't necessarily right for everyone right now. And so there's a lot of ins and outs, and that's why we have a training program for this, for the record.
I think also another really key factor in understanding a lot of this is the triage system that you had mentioned before.
Yes.
And this is something that I think Morley Robbins, not to drop too many names, but Morley and some other people in the alternative health space don't really understand. Like, especially with the bulk elements, the bigger elements, the calcium, the magnesium, the sodium, and potassium, those minerals make up 99% of the mineral content in your body. And as a result of this, your body has evolved exquisite mechanisms for regulating and triaging and partitioning these nutrients. And many of those regulating, molecules are hormonal in nature. So your hormones are very much involved in regulating, absorbing, partitioning many of these bigger elements, and even the trace elements as well. And part of what you're hinting at with iron is that iron, has to be bound to something in the blood, along with copper, other elements as well, so that they get sent to the right places and that they're utilized. And this is another really important fact about minerals, is that there's these underlying regulatory mechanisms that we can actually identify on the test, chiefly through looking at these bigger elements, right? And the interactions especially tell us a lot of information about this underlying regulatory system that exists as well.
And there's a lot.
Focusing in on those first four elements, right? The calcium, the magnesium, the sodium, potassium is what we do when we walk people through our interpretation approach in HTMA Secrets. Focusing in on those elements gives us a lot more power with respect to understanding your hormonal picture. But then many of the interactions that we were talking about a little earlier are sort of governed or run through those first four elements.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the thing about these elements is that, and about how they're partitioned, as you said, in the hair, I think that when people start doing this, they're going to fall into two camps. Either they're going to make a lot of mistakes in interpreting it, but not understand that they're making mistakes. Or they're going to say, wow, this doesn't really make sense to me based on what I know. This test must not be accurate, or must not be very valuable. Where I've actually got two tests from the same person, same day, that we're going to go over. I'm not going to obviously share the name. It's under a pseudonym. But I actually want to cover this today in the webinar, and we'll dive into that next. I want to cover it because I want to go through how many mistakes people will often make in these interpretations, so that we can really flesh this out and give you guys an idea of how deep this goes. Kevin asked an interesting question. He said, in regards to the HTMA, what is your recommendation for someone that has high calcium, copper, and lead levels? Metabolic type is slow. Thanks. So Kevin, if you want, that's not enough information for us to give you good ideas.
Yeah.
And so what I would say is join the coaching program if you want answers to questions like this, because we'll have the time to really go over it. And this is one thing that I think it takes time to coach people into understanding this at a holistic, comprehensive level.
Yeah.
Any idiot can say, oh, well, here's my adrenal cocktail level. You give it to this group of people or that group of people. Oh, slow oxidizers need B vitamins. Oh, fast oxidizers need, lots of fat. Oh, this, that, the other thing. That's very easy. But actually coaching people and teaching people and helping understand where your clients or patients are is a completely different task.
Yeah.
And so we really need time to teach you how to do that. If you're a coach, if you're a professional, if you want to actually do this professionally. And if you're a motivated consumer, the beauty of this is that you'll come out of this course with more understanding of this system and this testing modality than the vast majority of people out there in the health and wellness space, including some of the people who do this professionally and who never really spent. Yeah. I mean, Clark, you've seen, you and I have both seen people come to us from other practitioners who went through this process, had their HTMAs read, and got put on protocols that didn't make any sense when you really understand the mineral system and when you really spend a lot of time in continuity with people. And that's one thing that bothers me about where the health and wellness space has gone is it's this churn and burn cycle of like, well, let's get everybody in for a high ticket price using clever marketing. And then we'll sell them a bunch of supplements and then we're on to the next batch of people. But tons of people come out of our practice or business or whatever you call it, who are actually fundamentally dissatisfied with the results they got. They don't feel like they got good follow-up. They don't feel like they got enough hand-holding. They don't feel like they got enough education, and they don't feel like they got a real improvement. They felt like they're wasting their money, which is giving the whole integrative, holistic wellness space a really bad taste in the mouths of the consumer who's desperate for this help because they're getting none of this information or advice or diet and lifestyle counseling and coaching from the conventional medical establishment.
Absolutely. I hope that I would love to take like maybe 5 or 10 minutes right now before we go over those tests to set the stage and put hair analysis in its proper context.
Great.
In the same way that we've done this before with minerals, where we want to understand minerals in this mineral system where they all interact with each other at all times. Hair analysis similarly needs to be understood through its proper context within the framework of mineral balancing. So I think it's very important to define our terms because there's a lot of confusion about what is mineral balancing out there. So let's define it right now, and we can go through a little chain of logic to help people really understand this system. And so the first thing to understand about mineral balancing is mineral balancing is an alternative healing system that is concerned primarily with balancing the entire mineral system in your tissues. And so embedded in that statement is one very important statement or one very important phrase, the mineral system. This idea of the mineral system existing in the first place, most people do not get. And it is the linchpin for understanding mineral balancing and understanding HTMA as well more broadly. So mineral balancing is concerned, or an alternative healing modality that is concerned with balancing the entire system of minerals inside of you in your tissues all at one time. The implication of this statement, or the corollary, whatever you want to call it, is that the mineral system exists in the first place. In that mineral system, all of the elements interact with each other nutritionally, metabolically. The heavy metals interact in that system as well. Okay. And then after these statements follows, well, how do we measure this? That's where HTMA comes in. HTMA is the primary diagnostic tool that we use to measure the whole mineral system all at one time in your tissues. That is the key. We are using the HTMA not to measure individual nutrients or individual mineral levels. We are using it to measure the whole mineral system.
And it's very important to add to that it's over a 2 to 4 week window when the hair is growing.
Yes.
Because as someone who's done a lot of mineral levels, you will see them shift a lot. And so when you're looking at these levels in the blood, you will be grossly misled as to the mineral status of the patient. Yes. And if you know how to read an HTMA, you actually don't need the blood levels because you have enough information to know what minerals they need and will benefit from without that lab. And that's a great service to the patient because they don't need to have a needle stick. They don't need to go to a lab. They can do their test from home, ship it away, have the results come in. It's very seamless.
Exactly. And what you're talking about is, some of the benefits of using HTMA. It's a longer term test. It's a biopsy test, right? So we get to measure the minerals at the tissue level, but we also get to do so over a longer period of time. But we also get to measure them all at that same time. All the minerals are being measured, right? So it's the entire reading of the whole mineral system all at that same period of time. So all of those facts are very important to understand about HTMA, and it puts interpretation like mechanics in a different light. And so understanding that is critical, but then what, right? Because then how do we use the HTMA, which is a large, it's basically the linchpin of the entire course. How do we interpret the test? We try to identify important imbalances in the whole system, right? And then we use our knowledge of nutrient and mineral interactions to balance that whole system of elements all at one time as well. And it is the balancing of the entire system all at once that is like what we are attempting to do with this approach. And that's why we're using HTMA. Everything revolves around a reading of that system using the test, and then using our knowledge of nutrient and mineral interactions to balance that system all at one time. All of it revolves around the mineral system idea. And then it sort of begs the question, well, what does that do? What does balancing the whole mineral system result in, right? Which is a lot of different things, but primarily balancing of the mineral system triggers elimination of your toxic metals because of ionic mimicry, which is this, kind of highfalutin scientific concept related to this idea of minerals are replaced by heavy metals, and in many different ways, in many different tissue compartments. So you can then sort of think of mineral balancing as a reverse engineering of the total set of mineral imbalances in the mineral system that led to the heavy metal bioaccumulation in the first place. And so, yeah.
And our environment is grossly contaminated with heavy metals. We did a quick webinar on this, I think at the beginning of this month. Maybe it was the last month. Because we do a monthly webinar on this on the first Thursday, usually the first Thursday of each month. I'm going to have to skip this coming first Thursday, Clark, just so you know. But yeah, we're just too busy. And people, who want to get more time with us, listen to us more, join the course. We've got lots of people who are signing up. And so we're going to focus on taking great care of them. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. And the heavy metal problem is big. It's underestimated by a lot of people. We've been spewing heavy metals out into the atmosphere since the beginning of, in very, very significant quantities since the Industrial Revolution in Europe. But even the Romans, with their relatively primitive technology and relatively low population, were able to produce enough heavy metal contamination of the environment that it's detectable in Arctic ice cores.
Right.
And so virtually all human activity creates this contamination. If you look at heavy metal levels in the American Northeast, they're being driven by prevalent winds or prevailing winds coming up from the Midwest and the Rust Belt. If you look at the same problem in the Pacific Northwest, it's coming over from China. So people say, well, where did I get these heavy metals from? And it's like, well, they're in your personal care products. Lots of aluminum in deodorants, sunscreens, lotions, because people have not yet, there's going to be this sea change soon with aluminum. It's already happening where people, like with mercury, people started buying low mercury tuna. They fomented for the removal of mercury from medications, right? That was very successful. There's almost no mercury left in medications. I think there's still a few, but I don't know which ones they are. And they switched over from aluminum in many cases to mercury, right? Or sorry, mercury to aluminum, not the other way around. Right. And so this is happening, right? But this problem is real. It's real. And that's why we see such profound improvements as we push nutritive. I call them nutritive minerals. I actually don't know if anyone else uses that term. I like the term, though. Anyway, it works. And like Clark was saying, these minerals and metals, they have the same or similar radii. And so the body doesn't necessarily know the difference. And so as your nutritive mineral levels run down, your toxic element levels come up because the body retains them because it's desperate to hang on to anything that even looks like the copper, zinc, manganese, molybdenum that it's missing, right? And there's a whole host of reasons why this is a problem now more than it has been in the past. But the key is, and we can talk theory and, science all day, but we really care about helping people. And that's where getting people onto a more mineral dense diet and helping them to optimize their mineral system with the right supplements that bring it back into balance is the key. And the balance piece just cannot be overstated its importance because, all these minerals interact like you were saying. So for example, if you give someone too much magnesium, it tends to make them feel calm, relaxed, slowed down. But I've had patients come back to me and say, well, I took magnesium and I felt kind of depressed. Right? Same thing with zinc. Zinc is associated with energy production, protein synthesis, plays a whole host of roles in different cellular responses, cellular functions. But I had somebody come to me the other week, you were on the call, where they said, look, somebody came in and taking zinc, and they said, I really feel worse with this. I feel depressed, right? And the question is, well, how are these minerals interacting? And can we look at the system in a way that allows us to predict what someone needs, what they don't need? And we often find very high levels of the toxic elements on these tests. And that's, this is very well established in the literature, I would say, that higher and higher levels of these toxic elements in your hair, your nails, other things that your body is pushing out that are arguably excretory pathways of the body, the higher these levels are, the higher your risk of death. That's best, I think, exemplified in the QOPO heart study from Finland. But that's one of the other reasons why I'm so keen on this test. And so without further ado, let's jump into, unless you got something else you want to add.
No, that's it. Yeah. Just that focus on the mineral system, understanding how minerals and metals interact. It's key. It's very, very key.
And so I wanted to give people an idea of basically what our course and coaching entails. We actually look at tests from real people with their permission and consent, obviously. This is under a pseudonym, and I have the person's permission, obviously. And this is an example of a test that we will commonly see. And this pattern is 4 lows. And what a lot of people would make the mistake of thinking right off the bat is, okay, look in the middle of the graph or the figure. You've got this blue shaded in area that says ideal. That's based on healthy, fit young people from decades ago, 1980s in Arizona, right? When this was being pioneered by the guy who founded Analytical Research Labs, which we're still using as our reference lab to this day. And if you'll notice, you look at these numbers, right? They all look low across the board. So low calcium, low magnesium, low sodium, low potassium, low iron, low copper. And someone who doesn't understand the system would say, oh, you're grossly deficient in your minerals. You must not be absorbing anything in your diet. And we're going to give you a multi-mineral or whatever in order to replace all these things. The next thing you know, you're on an iron supplement and a copper supplement and a manganese supplement and a zinc supplement and a chromium supplement, a selenium supplement, and you don't have any time to actually, get on with your life in between taking these pills, right? The mistake they're making there, we've talked about already, which is they don't understand this concept that somebody can have a high total body iron and a low iron level in their hair.
Right.
And the tough thing about iron is that as it accumulates, and I've made many videos on this, I think, at this point. So if you want to learn more about iron, it's on my YouTube channel. Look up iron on there. You're going to get tons of, or you should get plenty of videos. And if you don't, ask me for more in the comments and I'll make them happen. But iron depletion can be really, really helpful, I've found, for patients, which really surprised me. And I do that based on a blood level. So when I see this in a 36-year-old male, I think, okay, this person's probably just a poor eliminator. And we need to get the system back on track so that their iron levels, which if I test them in the blood, almost surely in this demographic, they're going to be normal to elevated. And this demographic almost surely can stand, if not benefit from blood donation, depending upon the clinical picture, right? So that's one example. Other things I want to focus on in this test are the first 4 minerals: calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, which are, as Clark said, the 4 macro minerals. They're the bulk of the mineral content of the body. Why are these so important? They are the biggest mineral. They're not only the biggest mineral fraction in your body. That's largely because they're the biggest mineral contribution from your food. You consume each of these in high milligram, in the case of magnesium, to gram quantities. it's very worrisome or concerning if someone's eating less than a gram of particularly the sodium, potassium, and calcium per day. But also, magnesium. I like to see that more in the 7, 8, 900 range for most people. And one of the mistakes people will make here is they'll think, oh, we got to give you supplements of all this stuff. Can that be helpful? Yes. But take back to something we said earlier and something I say often to my people, which is, look, this is not a measure of intake. It's a measure of intake and excretion. And so this person doesn't necessarily not have enough of these minerals around. They're not excreting them. Why? And so that's where you start to talk to them. What's going on in your life? How are you feeling? How do you feel about that? How much stress are you under? A lot of stress patterns can be read out of this. This pattern of what we call 4 lows is one in which someone's usually saying, well, I feel like I don't have any gas left in the tank. I'm exhausted. I don't have any energy. I'm at the end of my rope. I really don't want this, thing in my life, my divorce, my, business dissolution, my bankruptcy, my insert difficult life event here to keep going. And it doesn't necessarily have to be some kind of life catastrophe, but that's where it actually, we'll do this. And I don't know how much you do this, Clark, but we'll actually talk to people about, well, look, if your business is creating this picture in your minerals or in your hair, then what is it doing to the rest of your health long-term? And your main health problem isn't IBS, isn't headaches, isn't depression, isn't anxiety. Your main health problem is your business.
Right.
You don't need a pill. You don't need a prescription. You don't need something that comes in a bag, a bottle, or a box. You need a strategy to change your life and your lifestyle so that your hormonal picture is more balanced, your nutritional picture is more balanced, and your hair doesn't show that you're feeling miserable. And you've commented on this before, because I respect people who say, look, that's great and all, but this is not a validated test. I've never heard of this. We've both experienced that the uncanniness with which people will endorse the subjective or the psychology behind these patterns in their hair, as far as what's going on in their life and how they feel.
Yeah, that's another really interesting aspect of hair analysis in general, is that you can do a very deep psychological profile on people based on these mineral patterns, which seems kind of woo-woo. It seems a foul.
Seems very woo. Let me go get my tinfoil hat.
Yeah. I'm going to go get my tarot cards. I'll be right back. We're going to do an analysis through that lens.
We'll be getting at the Ouija board later.
So you can do a pretty deep psychological analysis based on these mineral patterns. A lot of this has to do with, the brain is a biochemical organ, right? And the blood-brain barrier is actually evolved in the first place to regulate minerals because they are so important for regulating your neurotransmitters in your brain. So there are biochemical and mechanistic links between these elements and certain neurotransmitters, and thus behavior, thinking, psychology, right? So on this particular test, right, this person's in 4 lows, and their sodium and potassium are kind of very, very low. And this is maybe the most important finding on this test. And it tells us that this person's in burnout, not because they're not getting enough sodium and potassium, like you had stated before. It's not, this hair test is a measurement.
For a moment, it is important to confirm that the person gets enough mineral content. And this is 100%. Where I'm very wary of people being like, well, I ordered an HTMA on the internet and it showed I have low sodium and potassium, therefore I'm not getting enough. Well, hold on a minute.
Yeah.
How much are you getting in the first place?
Right.
Because you will find people, like we see this all the time in the practice. Somebody heard that carbs are bad, so they stopped eating carbs. Newsflash, your highest pound for pound source of potassium on planet Earth, not to mention your most palatable, is the root vegetables. So if you stop eating root vegetables, you're going to have to eat like a rabbit if you want to get more than 2, 3, 4 grams of potassium a day. I've really seen people struggle with this and will put high potassium carbohydrates, potatoes, sweet potatoes, bananas, tomatoes back into their diet. And wow, they feel so much more energy.
Exactly. And so, yeah, there's this interplay between intake and retention and excretion. And when we look at the hair test, especially at the sodium potassium levels, they are special elements on this test. They're special in your body. They're very, very important for a lot of different functions. But when we look at a hair test, it's really a reading of these underlying regulatory mechanisms that control these elements, i.e., aldosterone regulates sodium retention, cortisol regulates potassium retention in the tissues. So when we see low levels of these elements on a hair test, and in particular when you're in 4 lows, which is kind of like a deeper burnout pattern, it means that those hormones, the cellular effect of those hormones, because the hair is a cellular reading of these elements, the cellular effect of those hormones is low. And so we can say to some degree and with some degree of certainty that low levels of these elements equals low levels of those adrenal hormones, basically. And your retention mechanisms, your body's ability to retain these elements is impaired. And you may notice if you're in this pattern that you have you have an unquenchable desire for sodium and potassium containing foods. You feel like you can't get enough of those elements. And it has to do with the underlying retention mechanisms that the body has evolved, because these are so important, that we can read from using this test, right? And then there's a whole psychological profile that we can do based on someone who's in burnout, right? They have fatigue. They feel like they're not achieving what they want to in their life. And a lot of other psychological things can arise as a result of these imbalances, right? And so very, very important to keep that in mind when we read the first 4 elements. It's about these underlying mechanisms that we had talked about before, which are designed to regulate these elements in your tissues.
And I think one of the fascinating things about this test that we have to ask is, and I believe the answer to this is yes, based on my experience, is the hormones obviously have a powerful effect on these first 4 minerals, but how do the hormones respond to the proper balancing of the downstream minerals, the trace elements, iron, copper, manganese, zinc, chromium, selenium? Iron is such an interesting one because it's not really a trace element. It's in the body on the order of magnitude as the macro minerals are close to them. It's like 3 to 5 grams in the average adult who's well nourished. But copper, manganese, zinc, chromium, selenium, these are very small contributions to your total body's mass. But what I perceive is that people feel better, less stressed, more relaxed. And that's reflected then in better sodium, potassium levels, calcium, magnesium levels. And so I surmise that you need to have the proper trace element balance to actually have a healthy hormonal milieu. What do you think about that?
100%. There is a bidirectional relationship, right? If you want to use like a fancy term,
right.
The hormones affect the mineral retention, but the minerals also affect the hormones.
And the complexity of this is much too great for the standard reductionistic scientific model, because I sympathize with those of you thinking, well, why can't you prove this in a double-blinded, randomized, placebo-controlled clinical trial? And if life were that simple, I would do it. But the truth is, academia has devolved into this wasteland of just highly reductionistic thinkers whose reductionism is so extreme that all they study is one variable at a time.
Right.
And you are the patient listening to this, there's no way you're really going to do one thing at a time. And if you do, you're going to be really slow in getting well, if you get well at all. Because when we really see great success for people, it's not that we want to overwhelm them, because we sympathize with the fact that, and actually it's change that's too rapid is arguably worse than change that's more gradual, because what tends to happen is people jump on the wagon, they go as hard and as fast as they can, and then they radically fall off and they don't ever get back on. Whereas incremental change, people tend to tolerate better. But if you think about something as simple as telling someone or showing someone their hair tissue mineral analysis, it will alter how they think about the world if they really understand it, if it's explained well, and it will alter their shopping, their behavior, all these other things, right? You give them a potassium supplement and you explain to them what high potassium foods are, and not only do they take the supplement, but they also shop and buy and eat more high potassium foods. So this idea of treating you all like you're a double-blinded, randomized, placebo-controlled trial in a highly reductionistic way, I got to tell you, I abandoned that way of thinking a long time ago because it didn't serve my patients and didn't help them get the results they wanted. And I just said, look, if I'm going to move that slowly in my therapeutics, I'm going to be last to the party on some of the best therapeutic ideas out there. We have to be more, we have to accept the reality of strong anecdotal evidence and expert opinion, which in the hair tissue mineral analysis community is basically all we have. We have
Right.
people like Eck, Wilson, who've
Right.
seen thousands and tens of thousands of cases,
Thousands,
that many more hair tests, right? Because you order more than one per person. And that's something we really should talk about, by the way, is the duration of therapy.
Yeah.
So many people out there. Yeah, go ahead.
Really quickly, I want to talk about the interaction piece, and maybe one specific component of these interactions that I think will help make this a little more tangible for people. Because a lot of times when when we're talking about this, it's like, okay, well, how do these elements actually interact?
Yeah.
And on this test, there's a very important interaction, and very important parameters that interact with each other here. That in the alternative health space, if you're doing what we call replacement therapy, you could actually make yourself worse.
Yes.
And so let's look at the zinc level really quickly. Zinc is low, right? But then the sodium and the potassium levels are low, and the sodium potassium ratio is low. And so in the conventional replacement model, your zinc is low, you would just take zinc to raise that low zinc level, right? And this actually in mineral balancing would not be something we would ever do, because we consider sodium and the sodium potassium ratio with the zinc level, because zinc is a sodium antagonist. So if you were to take zinc by itself in this particular situation, everyone's been taking zinc, right? It's very good for inhibiting viral replication in the cell, right? Because
we don't say that word here, we get smacked by the algorithm.
The virus which shall not
give us a like, give us a share, give us a comment. The algorithm doesn't like us if you're watching this, and we really appreciate you helping us reach more people with reality instead of the manufactured dystopia they're trying to foist on you all, so you can own nothing and be happy, because that sounds great, doesn't it?
I know. I can't wait for that. But so zinc lowers sodium when you take it. And so in this particular situation, taking even modest doses of zinc by itself could make you worse because of zinc's antagonism with sodium. And so in this system of mineral balancing and using HTMA, we would give this person a different supplement that has zinc in it to correct for the low zinc level, but it also has sodium synergists in it at the same time to correct both of these parameters at the same time. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do with a hair tissue mineral analysis and with mineral balancing. There's multiple parameters on this test that are out of balance. We're trying to solve the equation of how do you balance all of these things all at one time. This, and going back to this, what you were talking about with respect to the RCTs, you can't correct for one thing at a time in the mineral system, because all of these elements interact nutritionally. And so you have to take into account, you have to take into account how these elements interact to balance all of these parameters at one time, basically. And that particular interaction is one of the most critical that we talk about in our course. There's many others, but this is a very good example of how these interactions actually play out and how you can actually make yourself worse, or even create new imbalances that you didn't even know that you didn't have, right? And so that's another very important piece. People are just throwing a lot of different supplements at all of these different conditions and problems that they have. Understanding these interactions helps us to solve for what do I take in what dosing for what amount of time.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And that's another thing that people will miss, is that they'll misunderstand some of what we say about these things, and they'll think, oh, well, maybe I don't have a lot of iron in my hair. Maybe I need to eat, but I might have a lot in my body. Maybe I need to eat less iron. Or wow, I don't have a lot of copper in my hair, but they're telling me I'm copper toxic. I better avoid copper. There are situations, and there's caveats to all of this.
Yes.
And it's fun. It's fascinating, and understanding it all is wise if you want to get the best possible outcome. So Kevin asks, is the HTMA course suitable for a person that wants to improve their health? I'm not a practitioner. The answer is definitely yes. We had a lot of motivated people who just wanted to know how to take better care of their families, eat better themselves, pick different foods, change their diet. A lot of that stuff we cover in the course to just as overall health and wellness information. So one last thing I want to mention about this test is the fact that there's repeatability. So Clark and I, we talked about this recently. We said, what if the test has a big variability in it? And so we both had, we both ourselves, and then I had some patients send off samples in duplicate. And sure enough, the levels are extremely consistent. So if you look between these two tests, right, you see that there's, maybe 1%, 10%, 15% variability. And one more thing I want to point out here is that this test includes these toxic elements here.
Yes.
And that toxic element component is a really important piece of this because, again, this is another thing that people miss on these tests is they look at these and they say, oh, I don't have a lot of heavy metals on board. These levels look good. But what will happen is we'll do enough of these tests and we'll push enough minerals in. And if someone says, wow, I feel way better. Or sometimes the reverse, I feel much worse. What's going on? And if you do a test at that time, you'll often see that a massive amount of heavy metals have come out of the system, or you'll just see that the mineral ratios have gotten better because you put them on the right protocol. So, and that's one more thing I also want to mention to people, because I had someone ask me this recently. They said, well, when do we sort of like get to the end of this, yellow brick road of hair tissue mineral analysis? And my answer was, look, the person is the purpose of this is for us to help you achieve your goals. So let us know what your goals are for starters, right? Because there's a lot more to this than just balancing minerals, right? Like I mentioned, I used the example of a business before. Sometimes a toxic relationship or too much stress from exercise. I mean, it's such a long list of things that derails people's health. Sometimes that's the real problem. And that's part of why people will give integrative alternative medicine a bad name. They'll say, well, I spent all this money and I saw all these practitioners and they didn't help me. And it's like, well, one of them may have told you what your real problem was and you just weren't listening or weren't willing to change it. You weren't willing to walk away from the toxic relationship, from the exercise addiction, from the staying up too late at night, playing too many video games, drinking too many alcoholic beverages. I mean, the laundry list of things that people do wrong. So the toxic elements do come out to play, right, Clark?
They do.
Once you've stuck with the program for long enough, and I want people to be on this path with me for at least a year. I don't require that commitment up front as a patient in the practice, and you're obviously not required to commit to that in the HTMA course, which is a 3-month course. It's 12 weeks. It's 12 weekly group coaching sessions, so you get plenty of time with us, plus the 6 modules that we line up for you. But I want a year of data to look at to really help them understand where they're at and what their system is doing so that we can optimize it, month by month, week by week. And, and you and I have talked about this as well, is how often should we be testing? And that's a whole nother kettle of fish that maybe we'll do a webinar on one day.
We could do a whole hour on that. But very important thing that you're talking about here with respect to toxic metals, we can use the HTMA in many unique ways to assess your toxic metal status. Yes, we measure the minerals directly. But when you understand that the metabolic parameters, the hormonal parameters associated with those first 4 elements and the hormones, those interact and those actually form the basis of some of your endogenous detoxification systems. Right. So hormones like thyroid hormone and adrenal hormones send signals to your liver to activate detoxifying enzymes and metal binding proteins.
Well, that's another element. Sorry, no, you go ahead.
Yeah, that's a very interesting interaction that we can kind of account for and use particular mineral ratios to assess the toxic metal status as well, right? So we can look at a toxic metal directly, high mercury, high aluminum, but we can also look at these metabolic parameters, the calcium magnesium ratio, the sodium potassium ratio, the calcium potassium ratio, and assess the hormonal effect and the hormonal power, as it were, basically, and associate your own detoxification capacity with whether or not those ratios are in a good range, right? And so then when we see metals that are very low, like lead and cadmium and nickel, they're essentially at 0. This is what we call the poor eliminator pattern, where these elements are so low that they're not being pushed out in the hair in any appreciable amount. And this is actually a fishy or suspicious situation because we know that you're being exposed to these elements by virtue of being alive in the modern world. And so when we combine like these,
And you're presuming everyone listening to this is alive in the modern world.
there's a lot of NPCs out there, so maybe not totally, there's some zombification going on for sure. But when you understand these, this poor eliminator pattern or concept in light of these metabolic parameters and the bigger ratios and stuff, you can do a very deep and interesting analysis on the heavy metals as well. So like the poor eliminator idea or concept comes from looking at developmentally delayed kids. I won't use the word. They in the mid and early 2000s, where they found very low levels of the toxic metals in the hair of the worst of the developmentally delayed kids, even though they know.
Chris Exley's work?
What's that? Exley, yeah, part of his work, and then others as well.
Yeah.
But they know that in the brain, higher levels of toxic metals are at least contributing to developmental delays. So
not to mention neurodegeneration. I mean, you look at all the big papers on this in the brain health space. Mm-hmm. As the brain ages and the body decays, people wind up with higher and higher levels of heavy metals in the brain that are not bound. And this includes minerals like copper and iron, and they're not bound properly by proteins, and they create oxidative stress and neurodegeneration. So for all we know, the epidemic of dementia that we're dealing with is, 30, 70% due to imbalances in minerals and heavy metals in the population at large.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's another thing that's kind of confusing about all of this, where the essential minerals are essential for life, essential for all of these different functions, but beyond a certain threshold, they can become toxic, and in improper forms, they can be toxic in the same way that the toxic metals are, but toxic metals are toxic at even like picogram at the smallest dose possible. So for a good, I always recommend this to everyone. I've done it in the course multiple times, but if you want a good idea, like a pop culture reference for this, go watch the movie Erin Brockovich. And in that movie, the people in the town of Hinckley, California are poisoned by a form of chromium that is very toxic to human beings, even though another form of chromium is essential for life and glucose metabolism.
Yes. And I've seen high chromium levels on tests before.
Yep.
And it's very interesting to try and figure out where these things are coming from, because as you can see, these tests are consistent test to test in the same person. And so, I'm doing a lot more quality control on this, but no one else is getting this level of data from what I can tell out there in the health and wellness world.
Yeah.
So it's very, it's a little bit disappointing that we don't have more people in the scientific community looking at this. Because I would love to know more about these analytical methods and data collection. But as I mentioned before, they're just lost in their reductionistic model of drugs and surgeries and whatever else it is they're obsessed with.
Comparatively speaking, there's like no resources devoted to studying this. And even there's a new field of science called ionomics, which is the formal study of these interactions of these elements, which is also very, very interesting, right? They're trying to characterize a lot of these interactions in human beings, but there's not a lot of funding there either. It's mostly because if they really elaborate on these interactions, it's already been done clinically, basically, but when they really do this, and if they were to institute this institutionally, it would basically put Big Pharma out of business. So there's no incentive at all to follow this. None.
There's a counter incentive.
Yeah.
And one thing that you mentioned that I want to point out here is this oxidation rate at the bottom. Now, this is calculated from some of the ratios up above.
Yeah.
But I just want people to know that this is another advantage of this test, is that a lot of you are going to hear things about methylation and, B vitamin status. I found that if you compare the hair tissue mineral analysis and what guys like Eck pioneered in their formulas, as far as B vitamin content, based on the mineral ratios, you actually cover the vast majority of defects within the methylation cycle with these protocols, which makes the organic acid testing that I'll still do for the record nice to have if you've got an extra $300 something to blow on lab testing.
All right.
But also makes it less essential because you're also capturing this oxidation rate on the test. Plus, this data gives you a clue as to what this person really needs to eat to feel at their best and function at their best. So any other last minute thoughts on the tests, Clark?
Yeah, we're doing an analysis of the mineral system. I always want to bring it back to that concept or that idea. We are doing an analysis on the mineral system. There are certain parameters in the system that are maybe more important, but that's really what hair tissue mineral analysis is used for. And it opens up this portal. It opens up a different world for interpreting this test. And there's just a lot of people that don't understand it in this light. If you do, it's really quite magical. What you can find, what you can do with this system. Yeah, it's really
it's not good. It's not great. It's not fantastic. It's not amazing. It's not incredible. It's magical. It's all those things, and it's magical.
Yes.
Right. All right. So we've got a mineral balancing program. It's a coaching program plus a course. It's 3 months, 12 weeks. Yes, we're taking the weeks off for Thanksgiving and Christmas because we love Jesus. Can I get an amen, Clark?
Absolutely.
Boom. I need the amen.
Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
And then we have 6 webinars pre-recorded. You get 1 a week. You get weekly group coaching with us for this 12-week period, and we will ship you a hair tissue mineral analysis. I want to let people know, by the way, we get rave reviews. We got raving fans. One in the comments. This is Miss Goodrich, says, I have personally gotten massive benefit out of the HTMA Secrets course, as well as working with Clark on mineral balancing as a licensed healthcare practitioner, as well as someone that needed to improve my own health. I can't recommend this program highly enough. Chelsea, we are very grateful for your testimonial, and we look forward to seeing you in level 2. So there's a level 1. We're talking about level 1 today. There's a level 2 if you go through level 1, which is even more fun and excitement. So the mineral balancing program is here. Normal pricing. The HTMA course is priced at $996 itself. Group coaching is $3,000. At least the value in this program. It's $250 per call. That's what I charge in my medical practice for group coaching calls. Initial consults with Clark by comparison are $599. My executive physical is $1,500 to $3,500. And you can't get in to see me before January now. We have no more availability the rest of the year. So this is a much faster way to get time to talk to me about health and wellness topics, whatever you care to know, regardless of whether or not you want to become a patient then in the future as well. So normal pricing, $39.96, expensive. I mean, relatively speaking, not for the value of the information. For the value of the information, this is very low because, I know people who are out there doing trainings like this that you'll get less out of, and they're charging $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, but they have like a whole sales team. And they're going to give you a call, and they're going to run you through these big complicated funnels, and they're going to get you all hyped up, and then they'll get you to get the sale done, right? We're very simple, very straightforward, because we don't have some giant support staff. We're able to offer it at a much more reasonable price. And the much more reasonable price is $996. So 3 payments monthly of $332. That covers the cost of the test we ship you and the time we spend on the group coaching calls with you, plus the time in the coachings. And by the way, you will get access to all the recordings. So that's 12 hours of time with Clark and I going over these tests and understanding the system, and also understanding how to coach and counsel people on how to be healthy and well.
Yeah.
So that's 3 monthly payments, $332. Normal pricing again, $39.96. Special webinar pricing, $996. That's a $3,000 savings. Not bad, right? I want to impress on you guys, this program is not simply about minerals. It's about teaching you the best strategies to be healthy and well for the rest of your life. This is what Clark and I have found in our own health journeys and our own professional lives to be the most important and impactful information that we could share with people. And it's where we recommend that people start, as well as, and I should have mentioned this, you actually get in our course, The Fundamentals of Wellness, which is a course that Jim Laird and I put together on basic fundamentals of wellness. It's where we start most of our people. And it'll give you a lot of the background that we'll cover in less depth in the coachings because we won't have the time, so that you get that value as well. And that's we usually price that at, I can't remember what we priced that at, but it's hundreds of dollars to get that course in and of itself. So this is a great value for you guys. We can only take 30 people. We want to maintain a very high quality of the training. We've already sold 15, so we've only got 15 more. So you better. It sounds a little too aggressive. You should act now. I strongly suggest and encourage you to act now. 10,000 people on the email list approximately are going to get a copy of the replay. 30 is 0.3% of that. So you can do the math. Not a lot of people have to sign up for us to book out. There's also a price increase coming next year. Clark and I talked about this. We thought about doing the price increase for this one because we had a ton of interest. We had like 300 people, sign up who were interested for the first course, and obviously only 10% of those people came through and worked with us. So we haven't talked about what the price increase is going to be, but it's not going to be small given the amount of interest there is in this course. So again, I recommend that you get into the course right now, so that you don't get hit by that price increase. So thank you all for watching. And now, if you've got any questions, post them in the comments. Dantel has a question. What if we are currently doing an HTMA? So I think if you, let's see, if you,
depends.
It depends. I mean, we had somebody from Australia ask us this question, and I said, hey, let's give her a 10% discount. So we could do that.
Has to be from a good lab, though. It has to be from a good lab. It has to be either from TEI or.
I'm glad you bring that up. So we have a lot of there's some HTMA testing services that we do not endorse, and we really don't know if we can help you if you're using them.
Right.
Some people use TEI. We don't like the TEI reference ranges.
Nope.
Just putting that out there. We like the ARL lab display. We think it's the best. It's best visually, and that actually really does help in your interpretation. So we can give you a 10% discount, but that's no promises on what your course is or what the quality of your test you've already purchased is. And if you want that, email. What's the best way? The best way to do that is Dantel is if you email Jim Laird, JIMLAIRD @stillmanmd.com. You can chat with him and he'll confirm who you are based on the webinar, and then he can send you a discount code. We can't extend that. We've already discounted it a lot, so we can't extend that to people, generally speaking. So any other questions, let us know in the comments. Clark, closing thoughts?
Closing thoughts would be just reiterating what I've said before, which is this mineral system idea. And mineral balancing is we're trying to balance the entire mineral system all at one time. And we do that through our knowledge of nutrient and mineral interactions. But the HTMA is the vehicle, it's the vessel that we're using to not only assess the mineral system, but then use our knowledge of nutrient and mineral interactions to balance the system all at one time.
And I should have said this earlier. The links to book the course, the checkout links are in the comments on the social media platform where you're watching this. If you're not ready to dive into the course, which we understand, life's crazy, maybe you're short on cash, we don't really care. Whatever your reason for not wanting to jump in right this second, if you would like to be on the waiting list is also in the comments. So get on the waiting list and we'll let you know whenever we're re-enrolling. And we're not quite sure when we're going to do that in the new year, but this cohort's going to run November, December, January. And because of Christmas and Thanksgiving, it's probably going to run a couple weeks later in March. So you're looking at, or February, I should say. So you're looking at, a 5 or 6 month waiting period if you don't jump in right now.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Since there's no more questions, take care. Have a great day. Don't forget to get outside and get some mineral dense foods.